The notification sound from my phone pierced through the quiet Sunday morning as I sat in my favorite armchair, one hand resting on my 7-month pregnant belly, the other holding a cup of decaf coffee that had long gone cold. I wasn't expecting any messages this early, especially not from my coworker Jessica, but when I opened Instagram and saw her post, my world tilted sideways. There, in a perfectly curated carousel of photos, was my baby shower. The baby shower I wasn't invited to. The baby shower my mother-in-law Patricia had thrown for me without telling me it was happening. The images flashed before my eyes like a cruel slideshow. Pink and gold balloons arranged in elegant arches, a dessert table that looked like it belonged in a magazine, women I barely recognized holding champagne flutes and smiling at the camera. And there, in the center of it all, was Patricia Martinez, my husband's mother, wearing a flowing mauve dress and the kind of radiant smile usually reserved for the guest of honor. Except the guest of honor, me, was nowhere to be found, because I had never received an invitation to my own celebration. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Emma Rodriguez-Martinez, though most people just call me Emma. At 28, I thought I had life figured out reasonably well. I work as a pediatric nurse at Southwest Medical Center in Phoenix, Arizona, where the desert heat can make even the strongest person wilt. But somehow I've always found comfort in the relentless sunshine and the way the mountains frame the horizon, like protective guardians. I met my husband Jake 3 years ago at a friend's barbecue, where he was the guy everyone gravitated toward, the one who could fix anything and make anyone laugh within 5 minutes of meeting them. He worked construction for Desert Sun Construction, had hands that could build beautiful things, and a smile that made me believe in forever. We got married 18 months later in a small ceremony at my family's church, surrounded by my tight-knit Hispanic family and Jake's more reserved relatives. The wedding was lovely, though I noticed even then how Patricia, Jake's mother, seemed to orchestrate every detail as if she were the bride herself. She chose the flowers, suggested the caterer, and somehow managed to seat most of my family at tables far from the head table where she positioned herself prominently. At the time, I chalked it up to her wanting everything to be perfect for her only son, but looking back now, I realize it was my first glimpse into how she viewed our marriage and where I fit into her carefully constructed world. Patricia Martinez was not the kind of woman who blended into backgrounds. At 54, she commanded attention with her perfectly styled auburn hair, her collection of designer handbags, and her membership at Desert Oaks Country Club, where she spent most of her afternoons playing tennis or organizing charity luncheons with women who shared her taste for expensive jewelry and subtle competition. She had been widowed for 5 years when Jake and I met, and in many ways, Jake had become the center of her universe. She called him every morning at 7 sharp, showed up at our house unannounced with casseroles we never asked for, and had opinions about everything from our choice of furniture to our decision to adopt a rescue dog named Buddy. When Jake and I announced we were expecting our first child back in January, Patricia's reaction was a whirlwind of emotion that somehow managed to be both overwhelming and oddly distant. She cried, she hugged Jake for what felt like 10 minutes straight, and then she immediately began making plans. Not with us, but for us. She researched pediatricians without asking what we preferred, bought a crib, and had it delivered to our house without consulting us on the style, and started referring to the baby as my grandchild in a way that made it sound more like possession than relationship. But it was the baby shower conversation that should have been my first real warning sign. 2 months ago, as I was entering my second trimester and finally feeling human again after weeks of morning sickness, Patricia had cornered me after Sunday dinner at her sprawling Scottsdale home. She was standing in her pristine kitchen with its granite countertops and professional-grade appliances, loading her dishwasher with the precise movements of someone who had perfected the art of entertaining, when she turned to me with that bright smile that never quite reached her eyes. "Emma, darling," she had said, and I should have known something was coming by the way she used that particular tone, the one that sounded warm but felt calculating. "I've been thinking about your baby shower, and I have some wonderful ideas. I know all the best venues, and my friends at the country club have been asking when we'll be celebrating. I was thinking we could do something really elegant, maybe in late May, when the weather is perfect for an outdoor gathering." I had been touched, genuinely moved by what seemed like her desire to make the day special. "That sounds lovely, Patricia. I'll need to check with my mom and sister about dates that work for everyone. My family is pretty flexible, but I want to make sure they can all be there." The pause that followed was so brief I almost missed it, but there was something in the way her smile faltered for just a fraction of a second that made my stomach tighten with an unease I couldn't quite name. "Of course, dear. We'll figure out all the details together." Except we never did figure out the details together. Over the following weeks, whenever I brought up the shower, Patricia would wave her hand dismissively and say things like, "Don't worry about a thing, I have it all handled," or, "Trust me, it's going to be perfect." When I asked about sending invitations to my family, she assured me she had everyone's information and would take care of everything. When I mentioned wanting to include some of my co-workers and friends from nursing school, she nodded enthusiastically and promised to add them to the list. I should have been more insistent. I should have demanded to see the guest list or, at least, asked for more specific details about when and where this celebration of my child was taking place. But I was working extra shifts to save up for maternity leave, dealing with the exhaustion that comes with growing a human being, and frankly, I was grateful that someone else was handling the logistics of party planning. Jake was putting in long hours on a major construction project, and between work and preparing the nursery and attending childbirth classes, it felt like a blessing to have one less thing to worry about. The weeks passed, and occasionally Patricia would mention the shower in passing, always with the same vague reassurances that everything was under control. My mom, Carol, asked me a few times about the details, wondering when she should block out her calendar and whether she needed to coordinate anything with the other grandmothers-to-be. Each time, I told her Patricia was handling everything and that I'd let her know as soon as I had more information. My sister Sophia even offered to help with decorations or food, but I assured her it wasn't necessary because my mother-in-law had insisted on taking care of every detail. It wasn't until the Wednesday before that fateful Sunday that I began to feel a creeping sense of anxiety about the whole situation. I was at work, checking the schedule for the following weekend, when I realized I still had no concrete information about my own baby shower. No date, no time, no location, no guest list confirmation. During my lunch break, I called Patricia from the hospital cafeteria, surrounded by the familiar sounds of medical equipment and hushed conversations. "Patricia, I'm so sorry to bother you, but I just realized I don't have any of the details about the shower. My family has been asking, and I feel terrible that I can't give them specifics." Her laugh was light, almost musical, but there was something underneath it that made my chest tighten. "Oh, Emma, you worry too much. Everything is absolutely perfect. I've sent out all the invitations, booked the most beautiful space at the country club, and ordered the most divine decorations. It's going to be exactly what you deserve." "That's wonderful, Patricia. But when is it? I need to know so I can make sure I'm prepared and so my family can plan accordingly." Another pause, this one longer than before. "This Sunday at 2:00. I wanted it to be a surprise, which is why I haven't given you all the details. I know how much you love surprises." Except I had never told her I loved surprises. In fact, I was the kind of person who liked to know what was coming, who planned ahead and made lists and preferred having all the information before making decisions. But I pushed down my discomfort and focused on the relief of finally having concrete details. Sunday at 2:00. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Perfect. I'll let my family know right away. Should I dress up? What's the theme? Just wear something comfortable and pretty, dear. And don't worry about your family. I have everything handled. That phrase, I have everything handled, should have been comforting. But instead, it left me with a nagging feeling that something wasn't quite right. I couldn't put my finger on what was bothering me, but as I hung up the phone and returned to my shift, I found myself distracted and anxious in a way that had nothing to do with pregnancy hormones. That evening, I called my mom to give her the details, excited to finally be able to provide the information she'd been asking for. Carol Rodriguez was the kind of mother who never missed an important event, who showed up early to help set up and stayed late to help clean up, who remembered everyone's birthday and always brought homemade food to gatherings. She had been looking forward to this baby shower almost as much as I had, seeing it as an opportunity to celebrate not just her first grandchild, but also to meet more of Jake's extended family and friends. Sunday at 2 at the Desert Oaks Country Club, I told her, settling into the couch next to Jake, who was watching a basketball game but listening to my conversation with one ear. Patricia said she sent out invitations, so you should have gotten yours by now. The silence on the other end of the line stretched longer than it should have. Mija, I haven't received any invitation. Are you sure she has the right address? Maybe it got lost in the mail? A cold feeling settled in my stomach, but I forced myself to stay calm. Let me double-check with her tomorrow. Maybe there was a mix-up with the addresses. I'll make sure she has everyone's correct information. What about Sophia? Has she gotten hers? I hadn't even thought to check with my sister. I don't know. Let me call her and see. But when I called Sophia, the answer was the same. No invitation, no mention of a baby shower, nothing. My 25-year-old sister, who was usually the first to know about any family event and who had been asking about the shower for weeks, had heard nothing from Patricia Martinez. That night, lying in bed next to Jake while he slept peacefully, I stared at the ceiling and tried to make sense of what was happening. Maybe Patricia really had sent invitations and they had gotten lost. Maybe there was a problem with the mail, or she had outdated addresses. Maybe she had been planning to call my family directly instead of sending formal invitations. There had to be a reasonable explanation for why my mother and sister, the two people who would move mountains to be at any celebration involving me and my baby, had heard nothing about the shower that was supposed to happen in 4 days. I told myself I was overreacting, that pregnancy was making me paranoid and emotional. Patricia had been nothing but welcoming since Jake and I got married, even if her enthusiasm sometimes felt a little overwhelming. She had never been anything but kind to my family during the few interactions they'd had, though I realized now that those interactions had been surprisingly limited. At our wedding, she had been polite but distant with my relatives, spending most of her time with her own friends and Jake's father's side of the family. At holiday gatherings, she was always gracious when my family was mentioned, but she never seemed particularly interested in getting to know them better or including them in her social circles. Thursday passed in a haze of work and worry. I kept meaning to call Patricia to clarify the invitation situation, but every time I picked up the phone, I hesitated. What if I was making a big deal out of nothing? What if asking about it made me seem ungrateful or controlling? What if there really was just a simple mix-up that would be easily resolved? By Friday afternoon, I couldn't stand the uncertainty anymore. I called Patricia from my car in the hospital parking lot after my shift ended, watching the desert sun cast long shadows across the asphalt while I waited for her to pick up. Patricia, I'm so sorry to keep bothering you about this, but I wanted to double-check about my family's invitations. My mom and sister both said they haven't received anything yet, and I'm worried there might have been an address mix-up. The pause was longer this time, filled with the kind of silence that speaks louder than words. When she finally responded, her voice had a different quality to it, less warm than usual, more carefully controlled. Oh, Emma, I'm so sorry. I should have mentioned this earlier, but I decided to keep the guest list a bit more intimate this time. You know how it is with venue limitations and budget considerations. I invited just the immediate family and my closest friends from the club. I'm sure you understand. The world seemed to stop moving for a moment. But Patricia, my mother and sister are immediate family. They're my family. Of course they are, dear, but you know what I mean. The people you're closest to now, your new family. Jake's aunts will be there, and all the women from our social circle who are so excited to meet you properly. It'll be much more manageable with a smaller group. I felt like I was drowning in confusion and hurt, struggling to understand how my mother and sister had been excluded from a celebration of my child, while women I had met only once or twice at Jake's family gatherings were apparently on the guest list. Patricia, I really need my family there. This is my first baby, and my mom has been looking forward to this for months. Can't we make room for just 2 more people? Another pause, and when she spoke again, her tone had shifted to something that sounded almost patronizing. Emma, honey, I know this is your first time planning something like this, but trust me, I know what works best for these kinds of events. The women I've invited are the ones who really matter in our community, the ones who can provide the kind of support and connections that will be valuable for you and the baby. Your family is lovely, of course, but this is about integrating you into the social circles that will benefit your future. The words hit me like a physical blow. I sat in my car, phone pressed to my ear, trying to process what I was hearing. My family, the people who had raised me and loved me unconditionally, who had celebrated every milestone in my life, who had welcomed Jake with open arms and treated him like the son they never had, were being dismissed as not mattering enough to attend my baby shower. Meanwhile, women I barely knew, women who had never shown particular interest in getting to know me beyond polite small talk at family gatherings, were deemed worthy of celebrating my child. I can't have a baby shower without my mother and sister, I said, my voice trembling with emotion I was trying desperately to control. They're the most important people in my life besides Jake. If they can't be there, then I don't want to have a shower at all. Don't be dramatic, Emma. You'll see on Sunday that I've planned something absolutely beautiful. Sometimes we have to make difficult choices about these things. I'm sure your family will understand. But I knew my family wouldn't understand, because I didn't understand. How could someone plan a celebration of my child and decide that the people who had shaped me into the woman I was weren't worthy of inclusion? How could Patricia look me in the eye and tell me she was doing what was best for me while simultaneously cutting out the people who had loved me longest? Patricia, I'm not being dramatic. I'm being clear about what I need. Either my family is included, or I won't be attending my own shower. The silence that followed was arctic, filled with the kind of tension that makes the air feel thin and dangerous. When she finally spoke, her voice was crisp and final. That's your choice, Emma. But the invitations have been sent, the venue is booked, and the catering is arranged. I've put a considerable amount of time and money into making this perfect, and I won't be changing plans at the last minute because you've decided to be difficult about the guest list. The call ended with a coldness that left me shaking in the driver's seat of my car, staring at my phone screen and trying to understand how a conversation about my baby shower had turned into what felt like a declaration of war. I sat there for a long time, watching other hospital staff walk to their cars, normal people ending normal days, while my world felt like it was cracking apart at the seams. When I finally drove home, Jake was in the garage working on his truck, grease-stained and focused on whatever mechanical problem he was solving. I stood in the doorway watching him for a moment. This man I loved who was about to become the father of my child. And I realized I had no idea how to tell him that his mother had just excluded my entire family from celebrating our baby. That night. Sleep came in restless fragments interrupted by the weight of hurt pressing against my chest like a stone I couldn't swallow. Jake had listened to my explanation about the phone call with his mother, his face cycling through confusion. disbelief, and finally a kind of resigned frustration that told me this wasn't the first time Patricia had created family drama. He held me while I cried, stroking my hair and making promises to talk to his mother in the morning. But even his comfort couldn't quiet the questions spinning through my mind. How long had Patricia been planning this deliberate exclusion? Had she ever intended to include my family, or had her promises been lies from the very beginning? By Saturday morning, I had made a decision that surprised even me. I wasn't going to sit in my house feeling sorry for myself while Patricia Martinez celebrated my pregnancy with strangers. I was going to find out exactly what was happening and why. The investigative part of my nature, the same instinct that made me a good nurse, kicked into gear with a clarity that cut through the emotional fog of hurt and confusion. I started with what I knew for certain and began building a picture of what I suspected but couldn't yet prove. The first call I made was to my coworker Jessica, whose Instagram post had revealed the existence of the shower in the first place. Jessica worked in the pediatric ICU with me and had always been friendly, though we weren't particularly close outside of work. When she answered the phone, her voice carried that slightly guilty tone of someone who realizes they might have stepped into family drama without meaning to. "Emma, hey, I hope you don't mind that I posted those pictures. Patricia said it was fine to share them, and everything looked so beautiful. You must be so excited about tomorrow." The casual way she mentioned tomorrow made my stomach clench. "Jessica, can I ask you something? How did you get invited to the shower?" "I mean, I'm grateful you were included. I'm just trying to understand how Patricia got your contact information." There was a pause, and I could practically hear Jessica's mental gears turning as she processed the strangeness of my question. "She didn't contact me directly. Linda Thompson reached out to me. You know Linda, right? She's friends with Patricia from the country club. Linda said Patricia had mentioned I was your coworker and asked if I'd like to come celebrate. I thought it was so sweet that she wanted to include people from your work life." Linda Thompson. I filed that name away, along with the growing realization that Patricia had been networking behind the scenes to create her ideal guest list. Did Linda mention anything about my family? My mom or sister? No, she didn't mention them at all. "Is everything okay, Emma? You sound upset." I forced lightness into my voice that I didn't feel. "Everything's fine. I'm just trying to get all the details straight. Thanks for filling me in." After hanging up, I sat in my kitchen staring at the list I was building. Patricia had gone to the effort of tracking down people from my workplace through mutual acquaintances, but she hadn't extended the same courtesy to my immediate family. This wasn't an oversight or a budget constraint. This was intentional. My next call was to Jake's brother Marcus, who lived about an hour away in Tucson, but usually made it to family gatherings when he could. Marcus was younger than Jake by 3 years, married to a woman named Diane, who had never quite warmed up to me but was always polite in that surface-level way that kept interactions pleasant, but never deep. If anyone would know about Patricia's true feelings regarding my family, it would be Marcus, who had always been Patricia's confidant, and the son who never challenged her decisions. "Marcus, it's Emma. I hope I'm not bothering you, but I wanted to ask about the baby shower tomorrow. Will you and Diane be there?" His answer came too quickly, in the tone of someone who had prepared for this conversation. "We'll be there for sure. Mom's been planning this for weeks, and she's so excited. She really wanted to make it special for you." "That's wonderful. I'm sure it will be lovely. Have you met many of the other guests before? I'm just trying to prepare myself for meeting new people." "Oh, you know. Mostly Mom's friends from the club and some of Dad's relatives you haven't met yet. Aunt Catherine is flying in from Albuquerque, and I think some of the ladies from Mom's tennis group will be there. You'll love them all." The ease with which he rattled off the guest list confirmed what I already suspected. Everyone invited was from Jake's side of the family, or Patricia's social circle. What about my family? Did Patricia mention whether my mom and sister would be able to make it? The pause that followed was loaded with the kind of awkward silence that confirms your worst suspicions. "I'm not sure about that, Emma. You'd have to ask Mom about the final guest list." But I could hear it in his voice, the careful neutrality of someone who knew exactly what was happening but didn't want to be the one to say it out loud. Marcus knew my family wasn't invited. He probably knew why they weren't invited. And he was choosing to go along with it rather than question his mother's decisions. "Thanks, Marcus. I'll see you tomorrow." After that conversation, I called my mom and asked her to meet me for lunch. Carol Rodriguez had raised 2 daughters largely on her own after my father Robert's hours at the automotive repair shop stretched longer and longer to make ends meet. She had the kind of intuitive understanding of people that comes from years of watching, listening, and reading between the lines of what people actually said versus what they meant. If anyone could help me make sense of Patricia's behavior, it would be my mother. We met at Cafe Luna, a small family-owned restaurant downtown that served the kind of authentic Mexican food that reminded me of childhood Sunday dinners. My mom was already seated when I arrived, her graying hair pulled back in the neat bun she wore to her job at the elementary school where she worked as a teacher's aide. She took one look at my face and immediately knew something was seriously wrong. "Mija, what happened? You look like you've been crying." I told her everything. The phone calls, the exclusions, the realization that Patricia had built an entire celebration around my pregnancy while deliberately keeping my family on the outside. My mother listened without interrupting, her expression growing more serious with each detail I shared. When I finished, she reached across the table and took my hands in hers. "Emma, I need to tell you something, and I need you to promise me you'll hear all of it before you react." The gravity in her voice made my chest tighten with apprehension. "What is it, Mom?" "This isn't the first time Patricia has tried to exclude us from things. Remember when you and Jake got engaged and she wanted to plan an engagement party? She called me once, about 2 weeks after you announced the engagement. She said she was thinking of having a small celebration and wanted to coordinate with me about dates. But the way she talked about it, it was clear she was really calling to find out what we might be planning so she could make sure her event happened first." I stared at my mother, pieces of a puzzle I hadn't even known existed starting to click into place. "What did you tell her?" "I told her we hadn't planned anything yet, but that we'd love to celebrate with whatever she wanted to organize. Then, she asked me about our guest list, who we would want to invite from our side of the family. I gave her names and phone numbers for your cousins, your tia Maria, your father's brothers. She wrote everything down and promised to include everyone. But she never called them." "No, she never called them. And when I asked you about it a few weeks later, you said Patricia had decided to keep the engagement party small and intimate. Just immediate family." The memory came flooding back. I had been disappointed that my extended family couldn't be there, but Patricia had explained that the venue had limited space and that she wanted to keep things simple. I had accepted her explanation because I trusted her, because I wanted to, believe that my new mother-in-law had my best interest at heart. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" My mother's expression was a mixture of sadness and protective anger. "Because you were so happy, Mika. You loved Jake, and you wanted to believe his family loved you too. I didn't want to plant seeds of doubt in your mind based on one incident. I thought maybe I was overreacting, maybe reading too much into phone calls and social situations. But now you don't think you were overreacting. Now I think Patricia Martinez has been managing your relationship with your own family from the very beginning. And I think she's been doing it so subtly that even you didn't notice until now." The weight of that realization settled over me like a heavy blanket. How many other times had Patricia orchestrated situations to minimize my family's involvement in major life events? How many decisions about guest lists and celebrations and family gatherings had been shaped by her desire to position herself and her social circle at the center of my life? "Mom, what should I do?" The shower is tomorrow, and everyone Patricia invited is expecting me to be there. But I can't sit through a celebration of my baby knowing that you and Sophia were deliberately excluded. Carol Rodriguez had the kind of strength that came from years of making difficult decisions with limited resources and complete responsibility. She looked at me with the steady gaze of a woman who had never backed down from a fight when her children were at stake. "You're not going to that shower, Emma. Not as Patricia planned it, but that doesn't mean we can't celebrate this baby in our own way." "What do you mean?" "I mean it's time your mother-in-law learned that excluding the Rodriguez family from celebrating our first grandchild was the biggest mistake she could have made. We're going to show her exactly what she chose to leave out." The plan my mother outlined over lunch was both simple and brilliant. While Patricia's carefully curated country club shower was happening, we would host our own celebration. Not as competition or revenge, but as a demonstration of what Patricia had rejected when she decided my family wasn't worth including. My mom would coordinate with Sophia to invite our extended family, the cousins and aunts and family friends who had been part of every major milestone in my life. They would bring homemade food instead of catered appetizers, family recipes passed down through generations instead of generic party spreads. They would bring gifts chosen with love and personal knowledge, rather than items picked from an expensive registry. "But Emma," my mother said, gripping my hands tighter, "this isn't just about throwing a party. This is about showing Patricia and Jake and anyone else who needs to see it that you come from people who know how to love unconditionally. We're going to celebrate this baby the way we celebrate everything important in our family, with open hearts, open doors, and room at the table for anyone who wants to share in our joy." That afternoon, I called Sophia and explained the situation. My sister's reaction was immediate and fierce. Sophia had always been the more confrontational of the two of us, the one who spoke her mind without worrying about hurting feelings or ruffling feathers. When she heard what Patricia had done, her anger was swift and protective in the way that only comes from sibling love. "She did what? Emma, that woman has been playing games with our family since day one, and I'm tired of pretending it's all innocent misunderstandings. Remember at your wedding when she seated us at that table in the back corner, practically in the kitchen? Remember how she introduced you to her friends as Jake's wife, instead of using your name? This has been building for years." "I know, but I didn't want to believe it was intentional. I thought maybe she was just particular about social situations. Or maybe I was being too sensitive." "You weren't being too sensitive. You were being hopeful. There's a difference. But now it's time to stop making excuses for someone who clearly doesn't respect you or our family." Sophia's planning skills kicked into high gear immediately. She would handle coordinating with our extended family, making sure food was covered, and arranging for our cousin Miguel to bring his guitar for music. She would contact my friends from nursing school, the women who had supported me through late-night study sessions and difficult clinical rotations, who knew me well enough to understand the significance of this moment. She would make sure our celebration reflected who I actually was, rather than who Patricia Martinez thought I should become. "And Emma," Sophia added before we hung up, "we're going to document everything. Every moment, every person, every dish, every laugh. Because when this is all over, Jake needs to see exactly what his mother chose to exclude from his child's life." That evening, I sat Jake down for one of the most difficult conversations of our marriage. He had spent the day at a work site, installing electrical systems in a new office building, and came home tired and covered in dust. Under normal circumstances, I would have let him shower and eat before bringing up family drama. But these weren't normal circumstances. His mother had forced a crisis that couldn't wait for convenient timing. "Jake, I need to tell you that I'm not going to the baby shower tomorrow." He looked up from unlacing his work boots, confusion and concern crossing his face. "What do you mean you're not going? It's your shower. Mom's been planning it for weeks." "Your mom's been planning it for weeks, but she's been planning it without my family. My mother and sister weren't invited, Jake. Deliberately. When I asked her about it, she told me they didn't matter enough to include. I watched his face. As he processed this information, saw the moment when confusion shifted to understanding, and then to the kind of tired resignation that told me he had dealt with his mother's controlling behavior before. He sat heavily on the couch next to me, still in his work clothes, and ran his hands through his hair. Emma, I'm sure there's an explanation. Maybe she thought your family wouldn't be comfortable at the country club, or maybe she was trying to keep the guest list manageable. Jake, she tracked down my co-workers through mutual friends to invite them, but she couldn't make room for my mother and sister. This wasn't about space or comfort levels. This was about control. What do you want me to do? The shower is tomorrow. All the arrangements are made. I want you to understand that your mother crossed a line, and I want you to choose whether you're going to support her decision or support your wife and child. The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of family loyalty and marital commitment, pulling in different directions. Jake had always been caught between his mother's expectations and his own desires, but this was the first time the conflict had been so stark and unavoidable. Finally, he looked at me with an expression that was part apology and part determination. What are you going to do instead? My family is throwing their own celebration at my mom's house, with the people who have actually been part of my life and want to celebrate this baby out of love, not social obligation. You're welcome to join us, or you can go to your mother's event. But I need you to understand that this isn't just about a party. This is about respect and inclusion and what kind of family we want to be. Jake was quiet for a long time, staring at his hands while he weighed his options. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft but certain. I'll talk to my mother tonight. I'll try to explain why this hurt you and see if there's a way to fix it. Jake, it's too late to fix it. The damage is done. The question now is what happens next. He nodded slowly, and I could see him beginning to understand that this moment was bigger than just a baby shower. This was about boundaries and priorities and the kind of marriage we were going to have. Whether Patricia Martinez would continue to orchestrate our family life from the shadows, or whether Jake and I would start making decisions together as equal partners. Late that night, after Jake had gone to bed, I called my father. Robert Rodriguez wasn't a man of many words, but when he spoke, people listened. He had the kind of quiet authority that came from decades of hard work and consistent character. He had been mostly silent during the discussions about Patricia's behavior, but I knew he had been watching and listening, forming his own opinions about his daughter's new family dynamics. Papa, I wanted you to know what's happening tomorrow. About the shower and why I won't be at Patricia's celebration. I already know, mija. Your mother called me. And I want you to know that what that woman did to you and to our family is not acceptable. But I also want you to know that we're going to handle this the right way. With dignity and class and love. What do you mean? I mean, we're going to show Jake's family what they missed when they decided we weren't good enough for their celebration. We're going to welcome that boy into our family the way we've always welcomed everyone, with open arms and full hearts. And if his mother has a problem with that, she can take it up with me. The quiet strength in my father's voice filled me with a confidence I hadn't felt since this whole situation began. Robert Rodriguez had never been the type of man to start fights, but he had never backed down from one either, especially when his family was involved. Knowing that he supported my decision to skip Patricia's shower and attend my family's celebration instead gave me the courage to face whatever consequences might come. Sunday morning dawned clear and bright, the kind of perfect Arizona day that makes you understand why people move to the desert despite the summer heat. I woke up feeling a mixture of sadness and anticipation, grief for the celebration that could have been an excitement for the one that was about to happen. Jake was already gone when I got up, having left early to help his mother with last-minute preparations for the country club event. He had kissed me goodbye and promised to try to smooth things over with Patricia, but we both knew that ship had already sailed. By noon, my mother's house was transformed into a celebration that felt like home in ways Patricia's country club event never could have. The familiar yellow walls were decorated with streamers in soft pastels, and the dining room table overflowed, with homemade tamales, fresh salsa, rice, and beans prepared with recipes that had been in our family for generations. The scent of my Tia Maria's famous flan filled the kitchen, mixing with the aroma of fresh tortillas and the kind of food that nourishes both body and soul. As family and friends began to arrive, each person brought with them a piece of my history and a promise for my child's future. My cousin Carmen, who had helped me with homework throughout high school and driven me to my first job interview, arrived with a hand-embroidered baby quilt that had taken her months to complete. My godmother, Elena, brought a silver bracelet that had belonged to my grandmother, carefully cleaned and polished for the newest member of our family. Sophia's college roommate, Michelle, who had never missed a birthday or important event in 5 years of friendship, came with a photo album documenting our relationship and empty pages for new memories with the baby. The gifts were personal and meaningful in ways that expensive registry items could never be. Each one came with a story, a memory, a connection that stretched back through years of shared experiences and forward into hopes for the future. This wasn't just a baby shower. It was a demonstration of community, of the kind of support system that money can't buy and social status can't replicate. As I sat surrounded by the people who had shaped me into the woman I was becoming, I realized that Patricia Martinez had made a catastrophic miscalculation. By excluding my family from her carefully orchestrated event, she had inadvertently revealed the depth of love and support she was choosing to reject. She had shown Jake and anyone else paying attention exactly what she thought was disposable in his wife's life. And in doing so, she had united our family in a way that might never have happened otherwise, giving us a common purpose and a shared understanding of what we meant to each other. The afternoon unfolded with the kind of easy joy that comes from authentic celebration. Stories were shared about babies and motherhood, advice was offered with humor and wisdom, and plans were made for the support network that would surround this child from birth. My father, who rarely spoke at social gatherings, stood up during the gift opening to make a toast that brought tears to everyone's eyes. To my daughter, Emma, who is going to be the kind of mother who teaches her children that family isn't about blood or money or social position. Family is about showing up, about choosing love even when it's difficult, about creating space at the table for anyone who needs a place to belong. This baby is lucky to have her as a mother, and all of us as a family. As he spoke, I felt my phone buzzing with text messages, but I ignored them, choosing to stay present in this moment of genuine celebration. It wasn't until hours later, after the last guest had left and we were cleaning up the remnants of our joyful afternoon, that I finally checked my messages. What I found there would change everything about how this story ended and what it meant for my family's future. The messages on my phone painted a picture of chaos that made my stomach drop even as a part of me felt vindicated by what was unfolding. The first text was from Jessica, sent at 3:30 that afternoon. "Emma, where are you? Patricia keeps asking when you're arriving and she's getting really stressed. Is everything okay?" The next message came from Jake at 4:15. "Mom is furious that you're not here. She's telling everyone you had a family emergency. Please call me." But it was the message from Linda Thompson, Patricia's country club friend who had apparently been instrumental in organizing the guest list, that revealed just how badly Patricia's carefully orchestrated event was falling apart. "Dear, I hope you're feeling better. Patricia mentioned you were ill, but several guests are asking about your family. Mrs. Chen from your neighborhood stopped by looking for the shower and seemed confused when we told her your mother wasn't invited. She said she had spoken to your sister about bringing a gift. I think there may have been some miscommunication about the guest arrangements. Mrs. Chen." My elderly neighbor who lived 3 houses down and had been bringing me homemade soup throughout my pregnancy, who had watched me grow up and had known my family for over 15 years. The woman who noticed everything that happened on our street and had opinions about all of it. If Mrs. Chen had gone to Patricia's shower looking for my family, it meant word was spreading through our neighborhood about the deliberate exclusion. And Patricia was having to explain to people why the guest of honor's mother and sister weren't present at their own family celebration. The final message was from Marcus, sent just 20 minutes ago. Emma, you need to call Jake. Mom is having a meltdown. She's locked herself in the country club bathroom and won't come out. The guests don't know what to do. I stared at the phone screen, feeling a complex mixture of emotions I couldn't quite untangle. Part of me felt sorry for Patricia, imagining her humiliation as her perfect social event crumbled around her. But a larger part of me felt something that might have been justice, the recognition that actions have consequences, and that Patricia was finally experiencing the results of her calculated cruelty. My mother appeared at my elbow, having noticed my expression as I read through the messages. What is it, mija? I handed her the phone without a word, watching her face change as she absorbed the details of Patricia's crisis. When she finished reading, she looked at me with the kind of steady resolve that had carried our family through every difficult situation we'd ever faced. She brought this on herself, Emma. She chose to exclude us, and now she's dealing with the social embarrassment of people realizing what she did. That's not your responsibility to fix. But Jake is caught in the middle of it. He didn't choose any of this. Jake is a grown man who has had years to see how his mother treats you and your family. If he's finally being forced to confront that behavior, maybe that's exactly what needed to happen. Before I could respond, my phone rang. Jake's name appeared on the screen, and I could hear the stress in his voice before he even spoke. Emma, where are you? Mom is completely falling apart. She's saying you deliberately ruined the shower, and that your family orchestrated some kind of sabotage campaign against her. Jake, I'm at my mother's house celebrating our baby with people who actually wanted to be here. What kind of sabotage is she talking about? Apparently, Mrs. Chen showed up at the country club asking for your mom and sister. When she found out they weren't invited, she started asking other guests why your family was excluded from your own baby shower. Then some of your co-workers started asking the same questions, and Mom couldn't explain why she had tracked them down to invite them, but hadn't included your immediate family. I could picture the scene perfectly. Mrs. Chen, with her direct manner and complete lack of patience for social nonsense, asking uncomfortable questions that Patricia couldn't answer without revealing her true motivations. The country club guests, probably polite but increasingly puzzled about why a baby shower was happening without the pregnant woman or her family present. Patricia, trapped in her own web of lies and social manipulation, finally being forced to confront the consequences of her actions in front of the very people she had been trying to impress. Jake, your mother created this situation when she decided to exclude my family. I'm not responsible for the fact that other people found her behavior shocking. But you could have been there. You could have prevented all this drama by just showing up. The words hit me like a slap, and I felt my protective anger flare in a way that surprised me with its intensity. I could have prevented the drama by participating in my own humiliation, by sitting quietly while your mother demonstrated to an entire room full of people that she considers my family disposable. There was silence on the other end of the line, and I could hear muffled voices in the background, people talking in the urgent tones that accompany social disasters. When Jake spoke again, his voice was quieter, less accusatory. Emma, I'm trying to understand your perspective, but I'm also watching my mother have what looks like a panic attack because her event is falling apart. Can't you just come over and help smooth things out? For the baby's sake? The baby's sake? Jake, this is exactly about the baby's sake. This is about what kind of family we're going to be and how we're going to handle people who try to control and manipulate us. Your mother needs to learn that there are consequences for treating people badly, even if those people are family members she thinks she can push around. So you're just going to let her suffer because you're angry? The question revealed so much about how Jake viewed this conflict. His automatic assumption that Patricia was the victim in a situation she had entirely created. It showed me how deep his conditioning ran, how thoroughly he had been trained to prioritize his mother's feelings over basic fairness or respect for others. Jake, I'm not letting anyone suffer. I'm refusing to rescue someone from the natural consequences of their own choices. There's a difference. After I hung up, I sat in my mother's living room surrounded by the remnants of our celebration, feeling the weight of what was happening and what it meant for my marriage. The baby gifts were still arranged on the coffee table, each one representing love and support and genuine excitement for the new life I was carrying. The contrast between this authentic joy and the manufactured crisis happening at the country club couldn't have been starker. Sophia, who had been cleaning dishes in the kitchen, emerged with 2 cups of tea and the kind of determined expression that meant she had been thinking while she worked. Emma, I need to tell you something, and I need you to promise not to get upset with me. What did you do? I may have done a little research into Patricia Martinez and her social activities, and I may have discovered some things that explain why she was so determined to control your baby shower. My sister had always been the one in our family who couldn't let sleeping dogs lie, who poked at problems until she understood them completely. In high school, she had been the one to discover that our chemistry teacher was giving preferential treatment to students whose parents made donations to the school. In college, she had been the one to uncover the fact that her sorority president was embezzling funds from their charity fundraiser. Her instinct for investigation had served her well in her career as a social worker, but it sometimes led her into territories that other people preferred to leave unexplored. Sophia, what kind of research? The kind that involves social media, deep dives and conversations with people who know Patricia. Did you know that she's been telling her country club friends for months that you come from a challenging background and that she's been working hard to help you fit into their social circle? The words landed like physical blows, each one confirming suspicions I hadn't even fully formed yet. What do you mean, challenging background? According to Linda Thompson's daughter, who went to high school with me and still keeps in touch, Patricia has been positioning herself as some kind of savior figure who rescued Jake from a poor Mexican family and is now graciously trying to elevate his wife to an acceptable social level. The racism underlying Patricia's behavior had always been subtle enough that I could question whether I was imagining it, whether I was being oversensitive or reading too much into innocent comments and social dynamics. But hearing it spelled out so clearly, understanding that she had been actively working to separate me from my cultural identity and family connections, made everything click into focus with devastating clarity. She's been telling people that our family is poor and that she's trying to help me. Worse than that, she's been telling people that your family is problematic and that she's trying to protect Jake and the baby from negative influences. She's been painting herself as the victim of a difficult family situation that she's handling with grace and patience. I felt my hands shake as the full scope of Patricia's manipulation became clear. This wasn't just about social snobbery or wanting to control party planning. This was about systematic character assassination, about Patricia positioning herself as the hero in a narrative where my family were the villains she was protecting her son from. There's more, Sophia continued, her voice gentle but determined. Linda's daughter said Patricia has been asking questions about Dad's work, about whether he has legal problems or drinking issues, about whether you and I had teen pregnancies or drug problems. She's been fishing for ammunition to justify excluding us from Jake's life. The violation felt complete and absolute. Patricia hadn't just excluded my family from social events. She had been actively investigating us, looking for ways to discredit us, building a case for why we were unsuitable influences on her son and grandchild. The baby shower wasn't an isolated incident of rudeness. It was part of a long-term campaign to marginalize my family and establish herself as the primary influence in my child's life. Does Jake know about any of this? I don't think so, but Emma, some of Jake's extended family definitely knows. Marcus's wife Diane was at Linda's daughter's birthday party last month, and she didn't disagree when Patricia was talking about your situation. She just sat there nodding while Patricia explained how hard it was to navigate family dynamics when there were such different cultural expectations involved. The betrayal felt layered and complex, involving not just Patricia, but other members of Jake's family who had apparently been comfortable listening to disparaging comments about my background without ever mentioning it to Jake or defending my family's character. I thought about all the family gatherings where I had felt slightly off balance, where conversations seemed to stop when I entered a room, where I had attributed awkwardness to normal new family adjustment rather than recognizing it as evidence of ongoing discussion about my suitability as Jake's wife. My mother, who had been listening to this conversation with the kind of controlled fury that comes from years of dealing with discrimination, finally spoke. "Mija, this woman has been waging war against our family since the day you got engaged. The question now is what you're going to do about it." "What can I do about it? She's Jake's mother. She's going to be my child's grandmother. I can't just cut her out of our lives." "You can't cut her out, but you can stop allowing her to control the narrative about who we are and what we mean to this family. You can start demanding that Jake see what's really happening and choose where his loyalty lies." Before I could respond, there was a knock at the front door. Through the window, I could see Jake's truck in the driveway, and my heart started racing with a combination of anxiety and determination. This conversation had been building for months, maybe years, and it was finally time to have it openly and completely. Jake entered my mother's house looking like a man who had spent the day in crisis management mode. His usually neat hair was disheveled, his shirt was wrinkled, and his face carried the exhaustion of someone who had been trying to solve an unsolvable problem. He nodded politely to my mother and sister, but his attention was focused entirely on me. "Emma, we need to talk. Privately. Anything you need to say to me can be said in front of my family. They're going to be part of this child's life, whether your mother approves or not." He glanced around the living room, taking in the baby gifts and decorations, the evidence of the celebration that had happened while his mother's event was falling apart. When he spoke, his voice carried a weariness that made me wonder how long. He had been managing conflicts between his mother and other people in his life. "Mom wants to apologize. She realizes she made a mistake with the guest list, and she wants to make it up to you. She's talking about having another shower, a bigger one that includes everyone. Jake, your mother doesn't want to apologize. She wants to control the damage from a social disaster that revealed her true feelings about my family. There's a difference. She's embarrassed and upset. She's been planning this shower for weeks, and she genuinely thought she was doing something nice for you. By excluding my mother and sister, by telling her friends that my family has a challenging background and that she's protecting you from our negative influence." The color drained from Jake's face, and I knew that Sophia's research had uncovered things he had never heard before. He looked between me and my sister, confusion and dawning realization warring in his expression. "What are you talking about?" Sophia stepped forward with the kind of protective anger that had always made her a fierce advocate for the people she loved. "Your mother has been telling people at the country club that Emma's family is problematic and that she's been working to help Emma fit in with a better class of people. She's been positioning herself as some kind of savior who rescued you from a poor Mexican family." Jake sat down heavily on my mother's couch, his head in his hands. When he looked up, his expression was a mixture of shock and something that might have been recognition, as if pieces of a puzzle he hadn't even known existed were finally clicking into place. "She never said anything like that to me. I swear, Emma, I had no idea she was talking about your family that way. But you knew she didn't respect us. You knew she always found reasons to exclude us from family events and social gatherings. You knew she treated me like a project instead of like your wife. I thought she was just particular about social situations. I thought maybe she was trying too hard to make everything perfect. My mother, who had been silent through this exchange, finally spoke with the kind of quiet authority that commanded attention. Jake, your mother has been systematically working to separate Emma from her family and culture since the day you got engaged. The baby shower was just the most obvious example of behavior that's been going on for years. The question now is what you're going to do about it. What do you want me to do? She's my mother. I can't just cut her out of my life. Nobody's asking you to cut her out, I said, feeling a clarity I hadn't experienced since this whole situation began. But I am asking you to establish boundaries. I'm asking you to make it clear that attacking my family is not acceptable, that excluding us from our own grandchild celebrations is not acceptable, that treating me like a social project is not acceptable. And if she can't accept those boundaries, then she'll have to live with the consequences of her choices, just like she's living with the consequences today. Jake was quiet for a long time, processing everything he had learned and what it meant for his relationship with both his mother and his wife. Finally, he looked at me with an expression that was part apology and part determination. Emma, I owe you an apology. I should have seen what was happening and I should have stopped it. I should have protected you and your family instead of making excuses for my mother's behavior. Jake, I don't need you to protect me. I need you to partner with me. I need you to recognize when someone is trying to damage our marriage and our family, even if that someone is your mother. What do you want me to do right now? Mom is still at the country club, still dealing with the aftermath of today. She's going to expect me to bring you back with me to help clean up the mess. Then you're going to disappoint her, because I'm not going to rescue her from a situation she created by treating my family badly. If she wants to repair this relationship, she needs to start by acknowledging what she did wrong and making genuine amends. What would genuine amends look like? I looked around my mother's living room, at the faces of the people who had celebrated my pregnancy with authentic joy, at the gifts chosen with love and personal knowledge, at the evidence of what Patricia had rejected when she decided my family wasn't worth including. It would look like her acknowledging that she was wrong to exclude my family. It would look like her apologizing directly to my mother and sister for treating them as if they don't matter. It would look like her committing to including us in future family events as equals, not as charity cases she's graciously tolerating. And if she won't do that, then she'll learn that there are consequences for trying to control and manipulate people. She'll learn that I'm not the kind of woman who can be pushed around or isolated from her family. And she'll learn that this grandchild is going to grow up knowing both sides of their heritage, whether she approves or not. As Jake sat there, processing the ultimatum I had just delivered, my phone buzzed with another text message. This one was from Patricia herself, and the words on the screen revealed just how far she was willing to go to maintain control of the narrative surrounding today's disaster. The message was short but loaded with implication. Emma, I hope you're satisfied with the embarrassment you've caused today. When you're ready to discuss this situation like adults, you know where to find me. Some of us understand the importance of family loyalty. I showed the message to Jake, watching his face change as he read his mother's words. This wasn't an apology or an acknowledgement of wrongdoing. This was Patricia positioning herself as the victim and me as the aggressor, setting up the next phase of her campaign to control how this conflict was understood and resolved. She's not going to apologize, is she? Jake asked, his voice heavy with the realization that his mother's behavior was exactly as calculated and manipulative as we had described. No, she's not. She's going to double down and try to make this my fault. She's going to tell anyone who will listen that I'm ungrateful and disrespectful, that I ruined a beautiful event she planned out of love. So what happens now? I looked at my husband, this man I loved who was finally being forced to see his mother clearly, and I felt a mixture of sadness and hope. Sadness for the pain this was causing him, but hope that we might finally be able to build the kind of marriage based on mutual respect and shared values rather than management of his mother's expectations. Now we decide what kind of family we want to be. We decide whether we're going to let Patricia Martinez dictate the terms of our relationships and our child's upbringing, or whether we're going to establish our own boundaries and stick to them, even if it means ongoing conflict with my mother. Especially if it means ongoing conflict with your mother. Because, Jake, this isn't going to get better on its own. If we don't address it now, if we don't make it clear that treating my family badly has consequences, it's only going to get worse when the baby comes. As if summoned by the intensity of our conversation, my phone rang again. This time it was Marcus, and his voice carried the kind of urgency that suggested the situation at the country club had deteriorated even further. Emma, you need to know that Mom is telling everyone who will listen that you and your family conspired to sabotage the shower. She's saying that Mrs. Chen and your co-workers were sent by you to cause trouble and embarrass her in front of her friends. The accusation was so outrageous, so completely disconnected from reality, that I almost laughed. But the implications were serious. Patricia wasn't just refusing to take responsibility for her actions. She was actively working to rewrite history, to transform herself from the perpetrator of deliberate exclusion into the victim of a coordinated attack. Marcus, did you tell her that's ridiculous? Did you explain that Mrs. Chen is our neighbor, who was looking for my family because she expected them to be at my baby shower? I tried, but she's not listening to reason right now. She's convinced that this was all orchestrated to make her look bad, and she's talking about taking steps to protect herself from future harassment. What kind of steps? The pause that followed was loaded with the kind of tension that precedes really bad news. She's talking about consulting a lawyer about harassment and defamation. She thinks your family might be spreading lies about her in the community, and she wants to explore her legal options. The escalation was breathtaking in its audacity. Patricia had excluded my family from a celebration of my pregnancy, been confronted with the social consequences of that decision, and was now threatening legal action against the people she had wronged. It was a level of manipulation and victim blaming that revealed the true depths of her character. Jake, who had heard Marcus's side of the conversation, looked at me with an expression of complete shock. She can't be serious about lawyers. Your mother has been waging a campaign against my family for years, Jake. She's been telling people we're problematic and unsuitable influences on you and our baby. Now that her behavior has been exposed, she's escalating instead of apologizing. Does that really surprise you? As I spoke, I realized that we had reached the point of no return in this conflict. Patricia had made it clear that she would rather go to war than acknowledge wrongdoing, rather destroy relationships than admit fault. The gentle approach, the diplomatic solutions, the hope that family loyalty and love would eventually triumph over pride and control, all of that was gone now. The battle lines were drawn, and the stakes were nothing less than the future of our family and the kind of life our child would have. Patricia Martinez had forced a choice that couldn't be avoided or postponed any longer. It was time to find out whether Jake would stand with his wife and child, or whether his mother's emotional manipulation would prove stronger than his marriage vows. The confrontation came sooner than I expected, arriving at my front door 3 days later in the form of Patricia Martinez herself, accompanied by a man in an expensive suit who introduced himself as her attorney, David Walsh. I was home alone, having taken a sick day from the hospital to process everything that had happened and figure out my next steps, when the doorbell rang at 10 in the morning. Through the peephole, I could see Patricia standing on my porch with her perfectly styled hair and designer handbag, looking like she was preparing for battle rather than attempting reconciliation. When I opened the door, she didn't wait for an invitation to speak. Emma, we need to discuss the situation that occurred on Sunday and how we're going to move forward. This is my attorney, David Walsh, and he's here to ensure that our conversation remains productive and legally appropriate. The audacity of showing up at my home with a lawyer, of turning my living room into a legal battlefield over a baby shower conflict, was so breathtaking that for a moment I couldn't find words. I stood in my doorway, 7 months pregnant and wearing yoga pants and one of Jake's old t-shirts, facing down a woman who had decided that threatening legal action was preferable to admitting she had made a mistake. Patricia, if you want to have a conversation, we can do that. But I'm not comfortable having legal discussions without my own representation present. Her attorney stepped forward with the kind of practiced smile that probably cost $300 an hour. Mrs. Martinez, we're not here to create any legal disputes. We're simply hoping to resolve some misunderstandings that have created tension within your family. Perhaps we could sit down and discuss this calmly. Against my better judgment, I let them into my living room, the same space where Jake and I had painted the walls last year in preparation for our married life together, where we had assembled the crib that Patricia had bought without consulting us, where we had talked about our hopes and dreams for the child I was carrying. Now it felt contaminated by the presence of people who viewed my pregnancy as a legal and social problem to be managed rather than a joyous occasion to be celebrated. Patricia settled into my favorite armchair with the territorial confidence of someone claiming dominance in unfamiliar territory. Her attorney sat on the couch with a legal pad, pen poised to document whatever admission of guilt or compliance they hoped to extract from me. The whole scene felt surreal, like I was living inside a bad television drama about family dysfunction and legal manipulation. "Emma," Patricia began, her voice carrying the kind of false warmth that barely concealed underlying hostility, "I want you to understand that I never intended for Sunday's event to cause any hurt feelings. I was simply trying to create an elegant celebration that would introduce you to the social connections that could benefit you and the baby in the future." The careful phrasing, clearly coached by her attorney, was designed to sound like an apology while actually reinforcing her original position that excluding my family had been a reasonable social strategy. She wasn't acknowledging wrongdoing, she was explaining why her wrongdoing had been justified and beneficial. "Patricia, you deliberately excluded my mother and sister from my baby shower while inviting people I barely know. That wasn't about social connections or elegant celebrations. That was about control and disrespect." Her attorney cleared his throat, a practiced interruption designed to redirect the conversation toward safer legal territory. "Mrs. Martinez, my client is concerned about some of the statements that have been made regarding her character and motivations. There have been allegations of racism and deliberate family sabotage that could be considered defamatory if they continue to circulate in the community." The threat was clear, even though it was wrapped in legal language. They were here to silence me, to make sure that my family's version of events didn't spread beyond our immediate circle, to contain the damage to Patricia's reputation before it could affect her social standing at the country club or in Jake's extended family. "Are you threatening to sue me for telling people the truth about what happened at my own baby shower?" "We're simply asking that you be mindful of the impact that unsubstantiated accusations can have on relationships and reputations," the attorney replied smoothly. "Sometimes family conflicts can escalate beyond their original scope when emotions run high and stories become exaggerated in the retelling." Patricia leaned forward, her expression shifting from false warmth to something harder and more calculating. "Emma, I've spent considerable time and money creating opportunities for you to be accepted in social circles that could benefit your child's future. The connections I've built, the relationships I've cultivated, these things have value that extends far beyond a single party. If you continue to damage my reputation with these accusations, you'll be hurting your own family's prospects in this community." The mask was finally slipping, revealing the transactional nature of how Patricia viewed relationships and social dynamics. In her mind, she had been doing me a favor by trying to separate me from my cultural background and family connections. and I should be grateful for her efforts to remake me into someone more acceptable to her social circle. The fact that I preferred my authentic relationships to her manufactured ones was incomprehensible to her, a rejection of benefits she couldn't understand anyone refusing. Patricia, I don't want to be accepted by people who would judge my worth based on my family's income or cultural background, and I definitely don't want my child growing up thinking that's how relationships work. That's very idealistic, Emma, but the reality is that social connections matter. They matter for business, opportunities, for educational advantages, for the kind of life you'll be able to provide for your child. I was trying to give you access to those advantages. By cutting me off from my actual family, by teaching my child that their grandmother and aunt on my side aren't worth knowing. The attorney sensed that the conversation was moving in directions that wouldn't serve his client's interests, and he intervened again with practiced efficiency. Ladies, let's focus on finding a path forward that works for everyone. Mrs. Martinez is prepared to make certain accommodations to address the family inclusion concerns, and in return, we would ask for assurances that the public discussion of Sunday's events will be limited to immediate family members. What kind of accommodations? Patricia's smile returned, the kind of expression that suggested she thought she was being incredibly generous. I'm willing to host another celebration, something more casual that could include your extended family. Perhaps a barbecue at my house, something less formal than the country club event. The offer revealed how completely she misunderstood the nature of the harm she had caused. She thought this was about party planning preferences or venue selections, about my family feeling left out of a fancy event. She didn't grasp that the injury was about respect and inclusion, about being valued as equals rather than grudgingly accommodated as an afterthought to her primary social agenda. Patricia, the problem isn't that my family wanted to go to a country club. The problem is that you planned a celebration of my pregnancy and decided that the people who raised me weren't important enough to include. A makeup barbecue doesn't address that fundamental disrespect. What would address it? Her attorney asked, clearly hoping to find some compromise that would end this conflict without requiring his client to admit significant wrongdoing. Before I could answer, I heard Jake's truck in the driveway. He was coming home early from work, probably having heard from Marcus or someone else that his mother was planning this legal intervention. Part of me was relieved that he would be present for this conversation, but another part of me was nervous about whether he would support me or try to broker some kind of compromise that protected his mother's feelings at the expense of real accountability. Jake entered through the front door, still in his work clothes, and stopped short when he saw the scene in our living room. His expression cycled through surprise, confusion, and then a kind of weary anger that told me he was finally beginning to understand the full scope of what we were dealing with. Mom, what are you doing here with a lawyer? Patricia's demeanor shifted immediately in the presence of her son, becoming softer and more vulnerable, the performance of a mother who was being unfairly attacked and needed protection. Jake, honey, I was hoping we could resolve this family misunderstanding before it escalates any further. Emma seems determined to paint me as some kind of villain, and I thought having neutral legal counsel present might help us communicate more effectively. There's nothing neutral about showing up at someone's house with a lawyer, Mom. That's intimidation, not communication. Her attorney stepped in smoothly, clearly accustomed to managing family dynamics in high-conflict situations. Mr. Martinez, your mother is simply trying to protect everyone's interest here. Family disputes can sometimes have legal implications that are better addressed proactively rather than reactively. Jake looked between his mother, her lawyer, and me, and I could see him processing the full implications of what was happening. His mother hadn't come here to apologize or make amends. She had come here to control the narrative and silence opposition through legal threats. The woman who claimed to love him and want the best for his family was willing to terrorize his pregnant wife rather than admit she had made a mistake. What kind of legal implications are we talking about? Jake asked, his voice carrying a dangerous edge I had rarely heard before. "Defamation, harassment, interference with business relationships," the attorney replied, consulting his legal pad. "When family disputes spill over into public accusations about character and motivations, they can sometimes cross legal boundaries." "Are you threatening to sue my wife?" Patricia rushed to answer before her lawyer could respond, clearly recognizing that Jake's protective instincts were being activated in ways that might not serve her interests. "Of course not, sweetheart. We're just trying to make sure that everyone understands the importance of keeping family matters private and handling disagreements with discretion. By bringing a lawyer to our house to threaten Emma?" "Nobody's threatening anyone," the attorney said, though his presence and his documentation clearly suggested otherwise. "We're simply having a conversation about how to move forward in a way that protects everyone's interests and maintains family harmony." Jake sat down next to me on the couch, his physical presence a clear signal about whose side he was choosing in this conflict. When he spoke, his voice was calm but absolutely certain. "Here's how we're going to move forward. Mom, you're going to apologize to Emma and her family for excluding them from the baby shower. You're going to acknowledge that it was wrong and hurtful, and you're going to commit to including them as equals in future family events. If you can't do that, then you're going to have very limited access to our child." The silence that followed was heavy with shock and the realization that the family dynamics had just shifted in a fundamental way. Patricia had expected Jake to mediate between his mother and his wife, to find some compromise that allowed her to maintain her position while making minimal concessions. Instead, he had drawn a clear line and forced her to choose between her pride and her relationship with her grandchild. "Jake, you can't be serious. You would really keep my grandchild away from me over a misunderstanding about party planning?" This isn't about party planning, Mom. This is about respect and inclusion and what kind of family we're going to be. Emma's family has been nothing but welcoming to me since the day we met. They've treated me like a son, included me in every celebration, made me feel like I belong. And you repaid that kindness by excluding them from celebrating their own grandchild." Patricia's composure finally cracked, revealing the desperation underneath her carefully maintained control. "I was trying to help her, Jake. I was trying to introduce her to people who could benefit your family's future. Her background, her family's economic situation. These things matter in ways that you're too young to understand." "There it is," I said quietly. "The real reason you excluded my family. You think they're beneath you. You think I'm beneath you. And you've been working for years to separate me from the people and culture that made me who I am. That's not true. I've never said anything against your family. You've told your country club friends that my family has a challenging background and that you're helping me fit into a better social class. You've investigated my father's work history, looking for problems you could use against us. You've positioned yourself as a savior rescuing Jake from a poor Mexican family." Jake turned to stare at his mother, and I could see the moment when her denials became impossible to maintain in the face of his direct questioning. "Is that true, Mom? Have you been talking about Emma's family that way?" Patricia's attorney cleared his throat, clearly recognizing that his client was about to make admissions that could undermine her legal position. "Perhaps we should focus on solutions rather than relitigating past conversations." "No," Jake said firmly. "I want to hear this. Mom, have you been telling people that Emma's family is problematic?" The question hung in the air like a challenge that couldn't be avoided or deflected. Patricia looked between her son and her lawyer, calculating whether continued denial or partial admission would better serve her interests. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the kind of defensive anger that confirms guilt while refusing to accept responsibility. "I may have mentioned that there were cultural differences that needed to be navigated carefully. I may have expressed concerns about ensuring that you and Emma had access to the social and professional networks that could benefit your careers and your child's future. If that was misinterpreted as criticism, then I apologize for any misunderstanding." The non-apology was masterful in its evasion, acknowledging nothing while appearing to offer conciliation. But Jake had finally heard enough to understand what his wife had been dealing with for years, and his response was swift and definitive. "That's not an apology, Mom. That's an excuse, and it's not acceptable. Jake, please don't let one difficult conversation destroy our family relationships. I love you and Emma and the baby. I just want what's best for everyone." Then prove it. Apologize genuinely to Emma and her family. Acknowledge that you were wrong to exclude them and wrong to speak about them disrespectfully. Commit to treating them as equals in all future family situations. Patricia looked to her attorney, who gave an almost imperceptible shake of his head, clearly advising against admissions that could be used against her in future conflicts. The choice between legal strategy and family reconciliation was stark, and her decision revealed everything about her priorities. "I don't think I can do that without compromising my own integrity and the principles I've tried to maintain in managing complex family dynamics." The formal language couldn't disguise the fundamental refusal to accept accountability or change behavior. Patricia Martinez was choosing her pride and her prejudices over her relationship with her son and grandchild, betting that Jake's family loyalty would eventually override his commitment to his wife and marriage. Jake stood up slowly, his face reflecting the pain of a man who had just lost his illusions about someone he loved. "Then, I guess we're done here. You and your lawyer can leave now." "Jake, you're making a terrible mistake. You're letting your wife turn you against your own mother over petty social disagreements. I'm choosing to protect my wife and child from someone who has shown that she's willing to damage their relationships and reputation to maintain control. That's not a mistake, Mom. That's what husbands and fathers do." As Patricia and her attorney gathered their things to leave, she made one final attempt to regain control of the situation. "This isn't over, Jake. I won't stand by and watch my family be destroyed by someone who refuses to understand how these social dynamics actually work. You'll realize eventually that I was trying to help. And when you do, I hope it won't be too late to repair the damage that's been done." The threat was clear even in its vagueness. Patricia wasn't accepting defeat. She was regrouping for a different kind of campaign. As they left, I realized that this confrontation had solved nothing, and possibly made everything worse. We had forced Patricia to reveal her true motivations and priorities, but we had also escalated a conflict that she clearly wasn't prepared to abandon. After they left, Jake and I sat in our living room trying to process what had just happened, and what it meant for our future. The baby moved restlessly in my belly, as if responding to the stress and tension that had filled our home. I placed my hand on my stomach, thinking about the child who would soon be born into this complicated family dynamic, and I felt a fierce protectiveness that surprised me with its intensity. "Jake, I'm scared about what she's going to do next. She's not going to just accept this and move on. I know. But Emma, I also know that we can't keep trying to manage her behavior and expectations at the expense of our own family's well-being. Today showed me that she's never going to change, never going to accept you and your family as equals. And I can't live with that. What does that mean for our relationship with her going forward? It means we set boundaries and stick to them, regardless of how she reacts. It means we protect our family from manipulation and control, even when it comes from people we love. And it means we prepare for the possibility that she's going to make this much harder before it gets better." As if summoned by our conversation, my phone rang. The caller ID showed my mother's number, and when I answered, her voice carried the kind of urgency that made my heart race. "Emma, mija, you need to know that Patricia Martinez just called me. She wants to meet with me and your father tomorrow to discuss the situation and find a way to protect the family relationships from further damage." The next phase of Patricia's campaign was already beginning, and this time she was going directly to my parents, probably hoping to find more malleable opponents or to create divisions within my own family that she could exploit. The manipulation was escalating, and I realized that the real confrontation was just beginning. "Mom, please don't meet with her alone. She just left our house with a lawyer, making legal threats and trying to intimidate us into silence. Whatever she wants to discuss with you is going to be part of some larger strategy to maintain control. Don't worry, mija. Your father and I have been dealing with people like Patricia Martinez our whole lives. We know exactly what she is and what she's trying to do. But we also know something she doesn't." "What's that?" "We know that our family doesn't break under pressure. We know that love is stronger than manipulation, and truth is stronger than intimidation. And we know that our grandchild is going to grow up surrounded by people who choose love over control. Every single time." As I hung up the phone, I felt a sense of certainty settling over me like armor. Patricia Martinez had made a catastrophic miscalculation when she decided to wage war against my family. She had assumed that we would be intimidated by lawyers and social pressure, that we would eventually capitulate rather than fight for our principles and our place in our grandchild's life. But she had underestimated the strength that comes from genuine love and authentic relationships. She had underestimated the power of a family that has faced discrimination and hardship together, that has learned to support each other through difficult times without conditions or manipulation. Most importantly, she had underestimated what a mother will do to protect her child from toxic influences, even when those influences come from within the family itself. The battle for my child's future was far from over, but for the first time since this conflict began, I felt confident about the outcome. Patricia Martinez might have money and social connections and legal resources, but we had something more powerful. We had love without strings attached, acceptance without conditions, and the kind of family bonds that can't be broken by lawyers or threats or social manipulation. The real question now was whether Patricia would recognize her defeat gracefully or whether she would continue escalating until she destroyed any possibility of maintaining a relationship with her grandchild. Based on everything I had seen of her character and priorities, I suspected we were about to find out exactly how far she was willing to go to maintain control, even at the cost of losing everything that actually mattered. The meeting between Patricia and my parents took place on a Thursday afternoon at my childhood home, the same house where I had grown up surrounded by the smell of my mother's cooking and the sound of my father's laughter echoing through rooms filled with family photos and memories. My parents had agreed to hear Patricia out, not because they were intimidated by her legal threats or social maneuvering, but because they wanted to give her one final opportunity to choose reconciliation over warfare. They had insisted that I be present for the conversation, understanding that any agreement reached without my input would be meaningless and potentially harmful. I arrived early, finding my mother in the kitchen preparing coffee and arranging store-bought cookies on her best serving plate. The formality of the setup told me everything I needed to know about how she viewed this encounter. This wasn't a casual family discussion. This was a diplomatic summit between opposing forces, complete with the kind of careful preparation that acknowledged the high stakes involved. "How are you feeling about this, Mom?" She looked at me with the steady gaze that had carried our family through every crisis we had ever faced. "I'm feeling like it's time for Patricia Martinez to understand who she's been dealing with. Your father and I have been patient and respectful because we wanted to give her the benefit of the doubt. But patience has its limits. My father emerged from the garage where he had been organizing tools, a task he always undertook when he needed to think through complex problems. Robert Rodriguez was not a man who spoke often, but when he did, people listened. His quiet authority came from decades of consistent character and principled decision-making, qualities that had earned him respect in every community where we had lived. "Mija, your mother and I have been talking about this situation, and we want you to know that we're prepared for whatever comes next. If Patricia Martinez wants to make this a fight, she'll find out that we don't back down when our family is threatened." Patricia arrived precisely on time, driving her luxury sedan and dressed in what appeared to be her version of casual clothing, which still looked more expensive than anything in my parents' closet. She was alone this time, having apparently decided that bringing a lawyer to my childhood home would be too obviously confrontational even for her standards. But her demeanor was no less calculated, carrying herself with the kind of confident authority that suggested she expected to control this conversation as thoroughly as she had tried to control every other aspect of our family dynamics. My mother greeted her with the formal politeness reserved for unwelcome guests who must nevertheless be treated with basic courtesy. "Patricia, please come in. Thank you for coming to discuss this situation." As we settled in the living room, Patricia's eyes took in the family photos covering the walls, the modest furniture that had been carefully maintained over decades, the evidence of a middle-class family that had built their life around love rather than luxury. I wondered what she was thinking as she absorbed the reality of where I had come from, whether she was calculating how to use these observations in future social conversations, or genuinely trying to understand the people she had been systematically excluding from her son's life. "I want to begin by saying that I deeply regret the misunderstandings that have developed around the baby shower," Patricia said, launching into what was clearly a prepared speech. "It was never my intention to cause hurt feelings or create family conflict. I was simply trying to create an elegant celebration that would benefit Emma and the baby's future social connections." My father leaned back in his chair, studying Patricia with the kind of quiet assessment that made most people uncomfortable. When he spoke, his voice was calm but carried an undertone that suggested he wasn't impressed by carefully crafted public relations statements. "Patricia, let's skip the diplomatic language and talk about what actually happened. You planned a celebration for our grandchild and decided that the child's other grandparents weren't worthy of inclusion. That wasn't a misunderstanding. That was a deliberate choice." The directness of his statement seemed to catch Patricia off guard, probably because she was accustomed to social circles where uncomfortable truths were wrapped in layers of polite evasion. In my father's world, problems were addressed head-on rather than managed through manipulation and strategic misdirection. I understand why you might see it that way, but the reality is that these social events require careful planning and consideration of group dynamics. I was trying to create an environment where Emma would feel comfortable and confident, surrounded by people who could provide valuable networking opportunities. My mother set down her coffee cup with the kind of precise control that signaled rising anger being carefully managed. "Patricia, are you saying that we would have made Emma feel uncomfortable at her own baby shower? Are you suggesting that our presence would have been somehow harmful to our daughter's confidence?" "Not harmful, but perhaps not as beneficial, as introducing her to the social connections that could advance her family's prospects in this community." The casual dismissal of my parents' value as human beings, delivered with the kind of smooth confidence that suggested Patricia genuinely believed her assessment was reasonable, crystallized everything that had been wrong with this relationship from the beginning. She wasn't just socially snobbish. She was operating from a worldview that assigned human worth based on economic status and social positioning, a perspective that made genuine relationships impossible. "Patricia," I said, feeling a clarity that cut through months of confusion and self-doubt. My parents raised me to value character over connections, integrity over influence, love over luxury. Those aren't old-fashioned concepts that need to be upgraded. Those are the principles I want to pass on to my child. "That's very admirable, Emma, but idealism doesn't pay for college tuition or create business opportunities. I was trying to give your child access to advantages that could make a real difference in their future success. By cutting them off from half their heritage? By teaching them that their grandmother and grandfather on my side don't matter because they work with their hands instead of managing investment portfolios?" Patricia's composure finally began to crack as the conversation moved beyond her prepared talking points into territory where her actual beliefs were being challenged directly. "I never said your parents don't matter. I simply recognize that different relationships serve different purposes in a child's development. My father stood up slowly, his movement drawing everyone's attention with the kind of quiet authority that commanded respect without demanding it. When he spoke, his voice was soft, but carried the weight of absolute certainty. Patricia, I think it's time for you to understand something about the Rodriguez family. We don't measure our worth by the size of our bank accounts or the exclusivity of our social clubs. We measure it by how we treat people, especially people who can't do anything for us in return. We measure it by whether we keep our word, whether we show up when people need us, whether we choose love over pride when the stakes get high. I respect that philosophy, but the reality is that social connections and economic advantages matter in today's world. I was trying to help Emma navigate those realities. By isolating her from the people who love her unconditionally, by replacing authentic relationships with transactional networking opportunities? The question hung in the air, exposing the fundamental difference in values that made reconciliation impossible. Patricia lived in a world where relationships were strategic assets to be managed for maximum benefit, where family connections were evaluated based on their contribution to social advancement. My parents lived in a world where relationships were built on mutual respect and maintained through consistent care, where family meant showing up regardless of personal benefit or social approval. My mother finally spoke, her voice carrying the kind of quiet strength that had guided our family through every challenge we had ever faced. Patricia, I want you to understand something about our grandchild. This baby is going to grow up knowing that they are loved completely and unconditionally by people who choose family over status, truth over convenience, integrity over advantage. They're going to learn that real strength comes from character, not from controlling other people. I want the same things for my grandchild. I just have different ideas about how to provide them. No, you don't want the same things. You want to create a grandchild who reflects well on your social status and validates your life choices. We want to love a grandchild who grows up confident in their own worth, regardless of what other people think about their family's background or economic situation. The distinction was sharp and undeniable, cutting through months of confusion about Patricia's motivations and making clear why compromise had been impossible. This wasn't a disagreement about party planning or social preferences. This was a fundamental conflict about values, about what kind of person we wanted my child to become, about whether love would be conditional on meeting external standards or freely given regardless of circumstances. Patricia gathered her purse, clearly recognizing that this conversation wasn't going to produce the outcome she had hoped for. I see that we have irreconcilable differences about how to approach family relationships and child rearing. I hope that someday you'll understand that I was trying to help, not harm. Patricia, my father said as she stood to leave, there's one more thing you need to understand. If you continue to try to manipulate or control our family, if you persist in treating our daughter and her family with disrespect, you'll find out that we're much stronger and more resourceful than you've assumed. We've dealt with discrimination and exclusion before, and we know how to protect our own. The warning was delivered without anger or threats, simply a statement of fact about what would happen if Patricia chose to escalate this conflict further. She nodded curtly and left without another word, leaving behind the lingering scent of expensive perfume and the heavy silence that follows failed diplomacy. After she left, I sat with my parents in the familiar comfort of my childhood living room, processing what had just happened and what it meant for my family's future. The baby moved restlessly in my belly, and I found myself wondering what kind of world this child would inherit, what battles they would face, what strengths they would need to navigate the complexities of family loyalty and personal integrity. "What happens now?" I asked. My mother reached over and took my hand, her touch carrying the comfort of unconditional love and unwavering support. "Now we focus on what matters. We prepare for this baby's arrival. We celebrate every milestone with joy and gratitude. And we build the kind of family legacy that's based on love rather than control. And if Patricia continues to cause problems? My father's answer was immediate and certain. Then we handle those problems as they come, together, the way families are supposed to. But Emma, I want you to understand something important. You've already won this battle. You've chosen love over manipulation, authenticity over social climbing, family over status. That's a victory that can't be taken away from you. The weeks that followed Patricia's visit were marked by a kind of peaceful preparation that I had never experienced before. Without the constant stress of managing her expectations and navigating her social manipulations, Jake and I were able to focus on getting ready for our child's arrival in ways that felt genuine and joyful. We painted the nursery in soft yellows and greens, chose bedding that reflected our personal taste rather than anyone else's idea of appropriate style, and made plans for the kind of childhood we wanted to provide. My family threw me a second baby shower. This one, a casual backyard gathering that included everyone who had been excluded from Patricia's country club event, plus neighbors, co-workers, and family friends who had heard about the conflict and wanted to show their support. The contrast with Patricia's formal celebration couldn't have been more stark. Instead of elegant floral arrangements, we had wildflowers from my mother's garden. Instead of catered appetizers, we had homemade tamales and fresh guacamole. Instead of strangers making polite conversation, we had people who had known me for years sharing stories and advice and genuine excitement about the baby's arrival. Jake participated in the celebration with enthusiasm that seemed to surprise even him. Away from his mother's influence and expectations, he relaxed into the warmth of my family's embrace in ways that reminded me why I had fallen in love with him in the first place. He helped my father set up tables in the backyard, played guitar with my cousin Miguel, and listened to my grandmother's stories about raising children with the kind of respectful attention that earned him immediate acceptance from the older generation. "This is what family feels like," he told me later that evening as we cleaned up paper plates and folded chairs. "This is what I want our child to experience growing up." What about your mother? Are you prepared for the fact that she might not be part of this kind of family celebration? His answer came without hesitation, reflecting a clarity that had been missing from our earlier conversations about family dynamics. If she can't be part of it without trying to control it, then she'll have to make that choice. But I'm not going to sacrifice what we're building here to manage her need for dominance. Patricia's response to being excluded from our family's authentic celebration was swift and predictable. She began a social media campaign designed to position herself as the wronged party in a complex family dispute, posting carefully crafted messages about the challenges of maintaining family relationships when cultural differences create misunderstandings. She shared photos from the country club baby shower with captions about her excitement for her grandchild's arrival, creating a narrative that painted her as a devoted grandmother being unfairly excluded from important family moments. The strategy might have been effective in her usual social circles, but it backfired spectacularly when people who actually knew our family began responding with their own photos and stories. Mrs. Chen posted a detailed comment explaining how she had been turned away from Patricia's event when she asked about my mother and sister. Jessica shared photos from our backyard celebration, contrasting the genuine joy and community support with the formal awkwardness of the country club gathering. Even some of Jake's relatives began commenting with observations about Patricia's controlling behavior and expressions of support for our decision to prioritize authentic family relationships. The public nature of Patricia's social media campaign and the community response it generated had consequences she clearly hadn't anticipated. Within days, she was facing questions from her country club friends about why her son's wife's family had been excluded from such an important celebration. Her tennis partners were asking uncomfortable questions about the family dynamics she had been describing so carefully, and the social status she had been so determined to protect was being damaged by her own attempts to control the narrative. Jake received a phone call from his Aunt Catherine, his father's sister who lived in Albuquerque, and had maintained a careful neutrality in family conflicts for years. Her message was brief but devastating in its implications. Jake, I've been watching this whole situation unfold on social media, and I think you should know that your mother called me last week asking for my support in her efforts to protect the family from Emma's influence. She wanted me to talk to you about the importance of maintaining appropriate boundaries with in-laws who don't understand social expectations. The revelation that Patricia had been recruiting extended family members to pressure Jake into compliance. With her wishes was the final piece of evidence needed to understand the full scope of her manipulation campaign. This wasn't just about a baby shower or social preferences. This was about a systematic effort to isolate me from my support system, while positioning Patricia as the primary influence in our child's life. "What did you tell her?" Jake asked. "I told her that Emma and her family had been nothing but welcoming to all of us, and that if she was having problems with her daughter-in-law, she should probably look at her own behavior rather than trying to recruit allies for some kind of family intervention." The conversation with his aunt seemed to crystallize Jake's understanding of what we had been dealing with and what was at stake for our family's future. That evening, he made a phone call that would define our relationship with Patricia going forward. "Mom, I want you to understand that Emma and her family are going to be central parts of our child's life, and your attempts to undermine those relationships or recruit family members to pressure us into compliance with your wishes are unacceptable. If you want to have a relationship with your grandchild, it will be on terms that respect Emma and her family as equals." Patricia's response was immediate and revealing. "Jake, you're making a terrible mistake. You're choosing people who will never be able to provide the advantages and opportunities that I can offer. You're sacrificing your child's future for the sake of political correctness. I'm choosing people who love unconditionally over people who love with conditions and expectations. I'm choosing authenticity over social strategy, and I'm choosing to protect my family from manipulation, even when that manipulation comes from someone I love. If that's your final decision, then you'll have to live with the consequences. But don't expect me to stand by and watch my grandchild's opportunities be limited by your idealistic choices." The threat was clear, and Jake's response was immediate and definitive. "Mom, any attempt to interfere with our family or damage our relationships will result in you having no access to our child at all. This is your choice to make." The phone call ended with Patricia hanging up, but her silence didn't last long. Within hours, Jake received a text message that revealed just how far she was willing to go to maintain control. "Since you've chosen to prioritize your wife's family over your own mother's wisdom and experience, I'll be exploring legal options to ensure that my grandchild has access to the advantages and opportunities that should be their birthright. Some battles are too important to abandon." The threat of legal action to gain custody or visitation rights with an unborn child was so outrageous that it actually clarified rather than complicated our situation. Patricia Martinez had revealed herself completely, showing that she was willing to weaponize the legal system rather than accept that her behavior had consequences, that she would try to use courts and lawyers to force relationships that couldn't be earned through love and respect. Jake forwarded the message to me with a simple note. "Now we know exactly what we're dealing with." But Patricia's legal threats, like all of her other manipulation tactics, ultimately backfired in ways she couldn't have anticipated. When Jake shared her message with his extended family, the response was swift and unanimous. His cousins, aunts, and even some of his mother's own friends began reaching out to express their shock at her behavior and their support for our family's right to make our own decisions about child rearing and family relationships. The community support extended beyond Jake's family to include my coworkers at the hospital, our neighbors, and even casual acquaintances who had heard about the situation through the interconnected networks that define small communities. People who had never been directly involved in our family drama began sharing their own stories about dealing with controlling relatives, offering advice and encouragement, and creating a support system that was far stronger than anything Patricia could have built through social manipulation. 3 weeks before my due date, we received an unexpected visitor. Marcus, Jake's brother, appeared at our door on a Sunday evening, looking uncomfortable but determined. He had always been Patricia's ally in family conflicts, the son who never challenged her decisions or questioned her methods, but something had clearly changed in his perspective. "Jake, Emma, I owe you both an apology. I've been watching Mom's behavior throughout this whole situation, and I've been making excuses for her because I didn't want to deal with the conflict that comes with standing up to her. But what she's doing isn't acceptable, and I can't pretend otherwise anymore." Marcus went on to explain that Patricia had been calling him regularly, trying to enlist his support in various schemes to regain control over our family dynamics. She had asked him to spy on our activities and report back to her, to pressure Jake into reconsidering his position, and even to provide character references for her potential legal action regarding grandparent rights. I kept telling myself that she was just worried about the baby and wanted to be involved, but I finally realized that this isn't about love or concern. This is about control and manipulation, and I can't be part of it anymore. The defection of her primary ally within Jake's family marked the end of Patricia's ability to wage her campaign from within our extended social network. Without Marcus's support and cooperation, she had no access to information about our lives, no way to coordinate family pressure, and no credible witnesses to support any legal action she might attempt. Our daughter was born on a bright October morning, 3 days before her due date, arriving into a world filled with people who had been waiting to love her unconditionally. The delivery room was filled with my family, Jake's supportive relatives, and a sense of joy that had been earned through months of standing up for principles that mattered more than peace or convenience. Patricia was not present at the hospital, having made it clear through her recent behavior that she viewed our child as a possession to be controlled rather than a person to be loved. The absence of her manipulation and demands allowed us to experience those first precious moments as new parents without the stress of managing someone else's expectations or agenda. When our daughter opened her eyes for the first time, looking up at faces filled with genuine love and excitement, I felt a sense of completion that had nothing to do with revenge or victory over Patricia's schemes. This was what family was supposed to feel like. This was the kind of love that would shape our child's understanding of her own worth and her place in the world. Jake held his daughter with tears streaming down his face, and when he looked at me, I saw in his expression the confirmation that we had made the right choices, fought the right battles, and built the foundation for the kind of family we both wanted to be part of. "She's perfect," he whispered, "and she's going to grow up knowing that she's loved for exactly who she is, not for who someone else thinks she should become." Patricia made one final attempt to insert herself into our daughter's life, arriving at the hospital uninvited and demanding to see her grandchild. But the nursing staff, having been briefed about our family situation and Patricia's history of manipulation, refused to allow her access without our explicit permission. Her public scene in the hospital corridor, witnessed by multiple staff members and other families, became the final piece of evidence that confirmed everything we had been saying about her character and priorities. In the months that followed, our daughter's birth, Patricia continued her social media campaign and made inquiries about legal options for forced grandparent access, but her efforts gained no traction in either arena. The community support we had built, the documentation of her manipulative behavior, and the clear pattern of her choosing control over family relationships made her claims about being an unfairly excluded grandmother impossible to sustain. Eventually, she seemed to understand that her campaign had failed completely and that continued efforts would only further damage her reputation and social standing. The silence that followed was not the peace of reconciliation, but the quiet of defeat, the recognition that some battles cannot be won through manipulation and legal threats. Our daughter is now 6 months old, surrounded by grandparents, aunts, uncles, and cousins who compete to spoil her with attention and affection. She knows the sound of my mother's lullabies in Spanish, the warmth of my father's gentle hands, the excitement of family gatherings where her presence is celebrated rather than managed. She is growing up bilingual and bicultural, connected to heritage and traditions that no one can take away from her, secure in the knowledge that she is loved completely and unconditionally. Jake has become the kind of father who understands that protecting his child sometimes means making difficult choices about family relationships, that love requires courage as much as it requires tenderness. He has learned to recognize manipulation when it comes wrapped in expressions of concern, to choose his wife and child over his mother's demands for control, to build the kind of marriage based on partnership rather than management of external expectations. The baby shower that started this whole conflict seems like a distant memory now, significant only as the moment when Patricia Martinez finally revealed her true character so clearly that denial became impossible. She had intended to demonstrate her power to control our family's social relationships and establish herself as the primary influence in our child's life. Instead, she had united our entire community in support of authentic love over manufactured relationships, character over status, integrity over manipulation. Sometimes I wonder if Patricia understands what she lost when she chose pride over family, control over connection, social status over genuine relationship. But mostly I focus on what we gained. A child who will grow up knowing that she is valued for who she is rather than what she represents. A marriage built on mutual respect and shared values. A family network that chooses love over loyalty to toxic behavior. The Rodriguez-Martinez family continues to grow and thrive, connected by bonds that were tested in fire and proved to be unbreakable. We celebrate birthdays and holidays with joy rather than obligation, make decisions based on love rather than strategy, and raise our daughter to understand that real family is about showing up consistently rather than controlling circumstances. Patricia Martinez remains absent from our lives by her own choice, having decided that being right was more important than being present, that maintaining her version of social propriety was worth more than holding her grandchild. The tragedy of her choice is entirely her own, a consequence of values that prioritized image over substance, control over connection, fear over love. Our daughter will grow up with questions about why one grandmother is missing from family photos and celebrations, and when she's old enough to understand, we'll tell her the truth about choices and consequences, about the importance of choosing people who love you for who you are rather than who they want you to become. We'll teach her that real family is built on mutual respect and unconditional love, that authentic relationships require courage and integrity, that some battles are worth fighting because the stakes involve the kind of person you choose to become. The baby shower that wasn't meant to include my family became the catalyst for creating a family legacy built on inclusion, authenticity, and love without conditions. Patricia Martinez's attempt to control our lives became the foundation for the kind of freedom that comes from choosing values over convenience, truth over peace, integrity over social approval. In the end, the surprise gift that my family brought to this situation wasn't wrapped in expensive paper or chosen from a luxury registry. It was the gift of unconditional love, authentic relationship, and the kind of strength that comes from standing together when the stakes are high and the choices are difficult. It was the gift of showing a new generation what family really means, what love actually looks like, and what happens when people choose courage over comfort in defense of the things that matter most. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.